Kang Daniel's story does not begin like the story of an ordinary idol. It begins like the rise of someone the public chose almost instantly, someone who did not just debut into fame, but exploded into it. Born on December 10, 1996, Kang Daniel first became a national sensation after winning Produce 101 Season 2, then debuted with Wanna One in 2017 before launching his solo career in 2019. From the outside, his rise looked almost unstoppable. He had the face people remembered, the stage presence audiences trusted, and the rare kind of star power that felt both accessible and overwhelming at the same time. He was not just popular, he felt inevitable. The kind of artist who could turn public attention into devotion within seconds. But that is only the surface of the story. Because Kang Daniel's journey is not just about fame, success, or becoming one of the most recognizable names to come out of a survival show. It is also a story about disruption, about a young man who reached the top fast, then found himself fighting battles most fans never imagine when they see a smiling idol on stage. Legal conflict, emotional exhaustion, public pressure, reinvention, and survival. All of these became part of the path that shaped him. So who is Kang Daniel beyond the headlines, beyond the stage lights, and beyond the image of the nation's chosen star? Behind the fame was never just a winner. There was also a fighter. And that may be the real reason his story still hits so hard. Before the fame, before the rankings, and before the entire country learned his name, Kang Daniel was just a boy from Busan trying to find confidence in a life that was not always easy. He was born Kang Jeon on December 10, 1996, and later legally changed his name to Daniel after years of people around him struggling to pronounce his birth name. He was also an only child, a detail that makes his story feel even more personal, because so much of his journey seems to come down to an individual fight to build himself from the inside out. What gives Kang Daniel's story emotional weight is that his confidence was not something handed to him naturally. According to accounts of his early life, he experienced ostracism in elementary school because of his appearance, and it was through dance that he began rebuilding his self-esteem. That detail matters, because it changes the way we see the star he would later become. The power audiences eventually saw on stage did not begin as effortless charisma. It began as survival. It began as a young person finding one place where his body, his energy, and his emotions could finally work for him instead of against him. Dance became more than a hobby for him. He reportedly joined a b-boy club in middle school after a teacher's suggestion, later trained at a dance academy in Busan, and even competed in youth dance contests before ever stepping into the national spotlight. In other words, long before Produce 101 turned him into a household name, Daniel had already been building the physical language that would define his appeal: rhythm, force, control, and a performance style that felt grounded rather than manufactured. That is what makes his later explosion into fame so compelling. Kang Daniel was not just another contestant who happened to go viral at the right moment. There was already a life behind that moment, one shaped by insecurity, discipline, and the need to prove something to himself before proving anything to the public. His image would later feel powerful, because that power had roots. It was earned in private before it was ever rewarded in public. And maybe that is why his rise would hit people so hard. Because when Kang Daniel stepped into the world of survival show competition, he did not come in as someone invented for television. He came in as someone who had already been quietly fighting for his own identity, and was about to do it on a stage much bigger than he could have imagined. When Kang Daniel entered Produce 101 Season 2 in 2017, he was still one trainee among many, representing MMO Entertainment. But what happened next changed everything. Over the course of the show, Daniel did not just gain attention. He became the contestant audiences could not stop watching. By the finale, he ranked first overall, earning a place as the center of Wanna One, the project group formed from the top 11 contestants. It was one of the fastest and most dramatic rises any young idol could experience. Part of what made Daniel's rise so explosive was how complete he felt as a performer. He had power, but he also had warmth. He could look intense on stage, then immediately feel approachable the moment he smiled. In survival show culture, where public voting is often driven as much by emotional connection as skill, that combination is incredibly dangerous in the best possible way. Daniel was not just talented, he was easy to root for. He felt like someone people wanted to protect, support, and push to the top. And that is exactly what happened. Once he won the show, Daniel was no longer simply a trainee chasing debut. He became a national sensation almost overnight. With 101's official debut on August 7, 2017, he entered a level of visibility that very few idols ever experience so quickly. The group's debut drew enormous attention, and Daniel stood at the center of it all, not only as a member, but as a symbol of the public's choice. But that kind of fame comes with a strange shock. One day, you are fighting to be seen. The next, everyone is looking at you. Every gesture means more. Every stage carries greater pressure, and every success creates new expectations that become harder to escape. For Daniel, this phase of his career was thrilling, but it also turned him into something larger than a normal rookie idol. He became an event, a headline, a phenomenon. That is where the emotional tension in his story begins to deepen. Because success at that speed can feel less like a steady climb and more like being launched into the sky before you have time to understand what is happening. The public loved him, the media followed him, and his image as one of the defining faces of Produce 101 became impossible to separate from his identity. But behind all of that momentum was a young man who still had to survive the machinery of fame in real time. And as Daniel's popularity with 101 soared, another truth started to emerge. Becoming the nation's chosen star was not the end of the struggle. It was only the moment the real pressure began. When 101's activities came to an end, many people expected Kang Daniel's next step to be simple. He was one of the biggest breakout stars in the country, the winner of Produce 101 Season 2, and a member whose popularity seemed strong enough to carry almost any future path. From the outside, a solo debut should have looked like a smooth transition. But for Daniel, this chapter became something very different. Instead of moving directly from group success into personal freedom, he found himself pulled into a legal dispute with LM Entertainment in 2019 over control of his contract, turning what should have been a triumphant new beginning into a fight for autonomy. That conflict changed the emotional tone of his career. Suddenly, the story was no longer only about a beloved idol entering his next era. It became about whether one of the most famous young stars in Kpop could protect his own future. The Seoul Central District Court ruled in his favor in May 2019, allowing the suspension of his contract, and after that, Daniel moved forward by establishing his own agency, Connect Entertainment. That decision mattered for more than business reasons. It reframed him. He was no longer just an idol chosen by the public. He was becoming someone who had to build a career on his own terms after discovering how fragile success could become behind the scenes. When he finally debuted as a solo artist with Color on Me on July 25, 2019, the release carried more emotional weight than a normal first solo album. It was not simply a debut, it felt like proof of survival. The EP arrived after months of uncertainty and became the first major statement of his post-101 identity. Daniel participated in shaping the project, and the release quickly drew major attention, with large pre-order numbers and record-setting first-week sales for a soloist at the time. What makes this part of Kang Daniel's story so powerful is that reinvention did not come from luxury or comfort. It came from disruption. He had already reached the top once through public love, but now he had to prove that he could stand alone without the protective frame of a project group or the momentum of survival show hype. That is a different kind of test. It asks whether an artist can turn recognition into identity and whether popularity can survive once the spotlight changes shape. Daniel answered that question not by trying to erase his past, but by moving through it. His solo era felt more personal, more vulnerable, and more exposed. There was no longer a team image to absorb the weight. Every performance, every release, every public appearance now had to carry the full meaning of Kang Daniel on its own. And that can be both empowering and terrifying for an artist who had already seen how fast success can become conflict. In that sense, this chapter was not just about music. It was about ownership, about resilience, about refusing to let a system define the limits of his future. Kang Daniel had already proven he could win the public once. Now he was proving something harder, that even after the machinery around him turned against him, he could still rebuild, stand alone, and keep moving forward. For a long time, Kang Daniel's story looked like the story of someone who could survive anything. He had already risen from obscurity to national fame, won the biggest survival show of his generation, endured a contract battle, built his own company, and successfully relaunched himself as a solo artist with Color on Me on July 25, 2019. From the outside, that kind of trajectory can make a person seem almost indestructible. But only a few months later, the emotional cost of everything he had been carrying became impossible to ignore. In December 2019, Kang Daniel's agency announced that he would temporarily halt activities to focus on his health. Reports at the time said he had been struggling with depression and panic disorder, and his hiatus immediately changed the way many people understood his story. What had looked like uninterrupted momentum from the outside suddenly revealed a far heavier reality underneath: fame, legal conflict, expectation, and the pressure of holding up an entire solo career had taken a serious toll. This is where Kang Daniel's story becomes more than a success narrative, because success is often easiest to admire when it looks smooth. But Daniel's path was not smooth. It was demanding in a way that can quietly break a person down. He was not only carrying his own image, he was carrying public expectation, the memory of being the nation's pick, the burden of proving that his post-101 success was real, and the emotional strain of rebuilding while everyone watched. That kind of pressure does not always show on stage. Sometimes it only reveals itself when a person can no longer keep pretending they are fine. What makes this part of his story so painful and so human is that it exposes the hidden contradiction at the center of idol fame. The stronger a star looks, the more people assume they can take. The more successful they seem, the less room they are given to collapse. Kang Daniel had become a symbol of resilience, but symbols are not supposed to need rest. Real people do, and that gap between public image and private suffering may be one of the harshest things any celebrity can face. His return in March 2020 did not erase what had happened. If anything, it gave his career a different emotional texture. From that point forward, Daniel's story no longer felt like only the rise of a beloved idol. It also felt like the story of someone trying to protect himself while continuing to create, perform, and move forward under pressure. That changed the way many fans saw him. He was no longer just powerful. He was vulnerable in a way that made his survival feel even more meaningful. And in some ways, that vulnerability never really disappeared. Even years later, the instability around Connect Entertainment resurfaced in a new form, when Daniel accused the company's major shareholder of embezzlement and announced the company's closure in June 2024, underscoring how often his career has been shaped not only by performance and music, but by battles for stability behind the scenes. That may be the deepest truth in Kang Daniel's story. People remember the winner, the star, and the sensation. But behind all of those images is someone who kept having to fight, simply to remain standing. Today, Kang Daniel's story feels bigger than the story of a survival show winner or a former project group star. He is still active as a solo artist, and after the collapse of Connect Entertainment in June 2024, he returned with the EP Act on September 23, 2024, marking yet another restart in a career that has repeatedly demanded reinvention. That is what makes his journey so emotionally powerful. Kang Daniel did not simply rise, shine, and stay safely at the top. His path has been broken up by conflict, instability, pressure, and exhaustion. And yet, each time the story seemed ready to close around him, he found a way to begin again. That gives his image a different kind of weight now. He is not only remembered as the center of 101 or the nation's pick from Produce 101 Season 2, he also stands as someone who has had to fight repeatedly for control over his life, career, and peace of mind. In many ways, Kang Daniel represents the side of K-pop people do not always see clearly enough. Not just the thrill of success, but the cost of carrying success when the spotlight never truly softens. His story is about fame, yes, but even more than that, it is about endurance. And maybe that is why his journey still resonates so deeply. Because behind the stages, the headlines, and the public love, Kang Daniel has never been just a winner. He has been a survivor, someone who kept moving forward even when standing still might have been easier.